welcome everybody. And look, I'm really pleased to be able to talk to you for a few minutes and share with you an update. It seems incredible that it's been a month since the last update. It feels like 2 weeks or even less, such is the pace at which things are moving. So look, there's a couple of things I want to touch in the March update. 3 things specifically. So the first is, you recall that in the last update, we shared with you that we will shortly make a Dacxi Chain global industry announcement. So I'm going to share a lot more with you about that. I'm also going to share with you a special preview to something that we're going to announce to the global industry as part of that Dacxi Chain industry announcement. Okay, so there's a particularly important component to that, which is brand new, no one knows about. We'll announce it, and I'll talk about the timing of that shortly. We'll announce that as part of our global announcement. And there's this new component. There's a sort of a special preview for our community. So you've got an understanding of one of the exciting elements, we think really exciting elements of that announcement. And then the third is to give you a quick update on the Dacxi Blockchain build project, something we haven't talked about for a little while, but we've got some news on that for you as well. So without any sort of further introduction, why don't we get straight into it? So let me start with sort of a summary of, look, when we sat down and we said, look, the quality of the engagement that we're getting from the industry, this is equity crowdfunding platforms, the breadth of that engagement and their willingness to actually get in the trenches with us and work with us on all the details that need to be understood in order to make this come alive. That is incredibly significant. We're going to go and announce this to the industry. We're ready, and we're ready because the industry is ready, okay? And so if we take a big step back, as we have done in the last few weeks, to say, okay, what have we learned recently, and what does all of that mean, and what does that mean for our big industry announcement? So I'm just going to run through a couple of the key points in terms of what we've learned and then what that means, and then talk about that announcement, okay? So look, the first thing is the industry desperately wants this to happen. Okay, this is something that's become clearer and clearer with every discussion that we have, and every crowdfunding platform that we start a conversation with, and that list is growing. Overwhelmingly positive support, and we've seen this universally across very diverse markets and regulatory jurisdictions. So Australia, New Zealand, the UK, across markets in Europe, in Brazil, there's a common thread, which is they all want this to happen. And on that basis, they've demonstrated a willingness to engage with us and to collaborate with us and to work with us closely in order to move this forward. So I think that's one of the first things that we've learned now that we've actually been out there working with crowdfunding platforms for a period of time. The second thing, and I think this is just as significant as the first, is that it's become clear to us that, in some ways, a corollary of this insight that the industry really, really wants this to happen is, well, why haven't they done it? And the answer is because they can't. They can't do it on their own. They need a third party, an independent organization that's not actually an equity crowdfunding platform themselves to come in and make it happen, come in and make it work. So this is something that we've started to realize, is that they need us. They can't do it on their own. And not only are we third party and not only are we independent, therefore we're non-competitive, but we can, as a third party independent organization, we can unite the industry through our shared vision. and then we can drive the process to deliver the solution. Okay, so this realization that the industry really, really wants this, but they can't do it without a third-party independent organization like Dacxi Chain. And we own this agenda, and we are driving this agenda. And of course, we're the technology provider that makes it all come alive. So this is part of the reason why the industry has been so willing to engage with us, is they see us as a very elegant solution to a huge opportunity. The third point is something that I've sort of touched on in different ways previously, but again, it's one of the key learnings, which is that not all of the markets that where we're talking to platform companies or equity crowdfunding platform providers, not all of those markets are created equal. And so what we mean by that is they don't just vary in size and scale and therefore opportunity, but they also vary in terms of the number of platforms that are active in each of those jurisdictions, the volume of deals that is going through those jurisdictions. And then, of course, from a regulatory perspective, some of the regulations in some markets are much more complicated than they are in others, okay? So it's an important part of what we're learning is to understand exactly where each market or jurisdiction sits in our hierarchy of what's desirable and also what's the point of entry to really move this forward quickly. So that's a really key point, and I'll expand on that in a moment as well. And then the fourth point is that the industry, all of the organizations that I'm talking to, and they're mostly CEOs, they see huge value in just coming together, just being able to come together and talk about this shared vision of a future with borderless global equity crowdfunding, where deals anywhere in the world can be shared with crowds anywhere in the world. They see value in being able to come together and have conversations, not just about what do you think of this and how do we do that, but just collaborating with each other. This is not something, particularly outside of their traditional markets, this is not something that they're doing. And so what we've realized is we're fostering this global community to come together where they can share learnings, they can share insights, they can share their ambitions for their own markets, and they can do that with safety because it's entirely non-competitive, okay? And of course, we are the facilitator of all of that. So it's been just fascinating for us to see the industry embrace what we're doing, not just because they want it, but also because they realize they need us, and also because they see huge value in just being able to come together as an industry across different markets and jurisdictions. So these are the key learnings. And so when we start to think about what does this mean for us, the first thing is it unambiguously validates that what we're chasing here is a very, very significant global opportunity. The industry that we need the cooperation of, they are very willing to cooperate because they want the same opportunity to be realized and they need us to deliver it, okay? So that's a really important part of how we think about our strategy moving forward. The second thing is that it's absolutely obvious that we are the undisputed global leader in this space. Our intellectual capital, the infrastructure technology that we've already built, our ambitions to take that into the blockchain world, our understanding of tokenization, all of these attributes, all of the progress that we've made, and all of the thinking that we've refined, it's absolutely clear to us that we are the undisputed global leader in this space. And so that's a hugely important point, okay? This is an opportunity where the first mover has a huge advantage. And so now, having spent a significant period of time in the industry, talking to the industry, it's clear that no one else of any significance with any real momentum or any resources is actually laser focused on this opportunity and driving it forward, holding the hands of the industry as we do it, like we are at Dacxi Chain. So that's really important for us. The other thing is that different regulations in each jurisdiction, it continues to create friction for us and of course for the industry in creating this ecosystem of borderless equity crowdfunding. And look, having dived into all the minutiae of this, with the regulations, pulling these apart in discussions with various platforms that are operating in different markets, it's clear to us that Europe is the optimal jurisdiction for us. It has one regulatory framework, but it also has 27 individual countries. So what it means is large, diverse market of opportunity, but all in this singular regulatory framework, which I've talked about previously. So the number of partners, the volume of deals, just the mindset in Europe, very progressive, very, how do we move this forward? What is it we need to do? How can we help? How do you want us to get involved? Okay. This makes this a very, I think, a very, very important territory for Dacxi Chain. And so Europe is now very much a core focus in our global strategy, okay? Where previously we were looking at various jurisdictions and bringing them together, we now see Europe as a little bit of a hub inside a wheel where we can actually explore cross-border deals within Europe as well as expand outside of Europe, knowing that Europe is under this singular regulatory framework, which makes some of the complexities and therefore the friction that we have to overcome much easier for us and for those that we're working with. So, and the fourth point is really, again, an extension of what I mentioned on the previous slide, which is that there's a very high return benefit to continue to bring the industry together, okay? It shows the world that the industry shares our vision. It continually enriches our understanding of what measures we can be taking or what measures the industry can be taking to realize the vision. And together, the global industry can drive structural change, change in the way that the industry operates across borders. We can do this together because the industry has that same shared vision of global equity crowdfunding. So these are the key things that it means for us. So we will make, in April, the global industry announcement where we announce Dacxi Chain, our vision, all of the progress that we've made, the partners that we've worked with and are working with and continue to talk to, all of that will be wrapped up in a big industry announcement. We had planned to do it before the end of this quarter. I think the scale of that task and some of the other components within it means that we're better off just taking a little bit more time and doing it in April. And so to that, as this special preview I talked about, in that announcement in April, we're also going to announce to the global industry the formation of the Global Equity Crowdfunding Alliance. So what is the Global Equity Crowdfunding Alliance? In a nutshell, this allows us to create some formality and an identity to the work that we're doing with the industry across the world to bring everyone together around this shared vision of globalizing and making borderless equity crowdfunding for everybody. And so this idea of creating the Global Equity Crowdfunding Alliance will be an important part of the industry announcement that we make in April. And so I wanted to flag that with you. So everyone's got this special preview. But just to expand on that a little bit, starting with, well, what is it? And so it's a coalition of equity crowdfunding platforms from around the world that are working together to realize the Dacxi Chain vision, okay? And it provides a much more structured framework and an identity and a name through which we can unify the global industry under our shared vision, continue to actively collaborate, and to explore and execute deal sharing scenarios with all of the crowdfunding companies that are part of that alliance, that global alliance. It allows us to engage as a global alliance, as a global industry, with regulators all around the world. Okay, so it gives us a very powerful positioning through which we can actually start to engage with regulators, as well as building the tech and as well as progressing to the sharing of deals. Okay, and we think that duality is really important, and the most powerful way that we can engage with regulators is through this global equity crowdfunding alliance. It gives it real currency beyond it just being Dacxi Chain, the organization. Okay, so we think that's very powerful. And of course, it continues to underline Dacxi Chain as the universally recognized global leader, both now and in the future, in this space. And that is the business of turning equity crowdfunding into a global ecosystem. Okay, so that's what it is, and that's going to form a really important part of our announcement in the very near future, in April. And so the other way I wanted to explain this to you is, what does this mean for equity crowdfunding companies? You know, what's in it for them to be part of this global coalition, this global alliance of equity crowdfunding platforms? So there's a couple of really important things. The first is that we can collaborate globally on establishing global standards. Okay, so at the moment, we're working through the friction of many, many, many local standards. If we can galvanize the industry, and they want this, they desperately want this, under the heading of the Global Equity Crowdfunding Alliance, we can start to construct global standards and work together to develop those and advocate for those and engage with regulators around the world in relation to that, whilst also ensuring that any changes to regulations continue to protect investors and balance the needs of individual investors, companies raising funds to innovate, and the platforms that represent them. Okay, so that collaboration has huge value under this banner of the Global Equity Crowdfunding Alliance. Share best practices. This is this idea that I mentioned earlier around just being able to talk to other companies that are non-competitive and share insights and strategies, share stories on how they've innovated, talk about how they've managed to work around certain complexities in their business or in their market. So all of those best practices. Of course, facilitate cross-border investing. This is incredibly important to us. It remains absolutely central, which is essentially to allow investors to participate in opportunities worldwide, expand their investment horizons. And again, this is a vision that the entire industry, we've come to understand. The entire industry really wants this. But this global equity crowdfunding alliance will give us the vehicle through which we can demonstrate that we do represent the entire global industry and we are driving it forward. And then education and empowerment. So this is events, webinars, educational experiences and initiatives that we can actually put together ourselves, and the global crowdfunding industry can participate. And all of that would be under the heading of the Global Equity Crowdfunding Alliance. So just to be clear, the Global Equity Crowdfunding Alliance is absolutely inseparable from Dacxi Chain. Okay, you can't separate the two. That'll be part of the positioning. But giving it its own name gives it its own identity, which really is a very powerful vehicle for us to drive it forward. And that's about engaging with more platforms in more markets. It's about enriching our understanding of what we need to achieve with the technology so that deal flow is sooner rather than later. And it's about galvanizing the industry to engage with regulators around the world. So we think this is a very powerful way forward for us. And I just wanted to give everyone a special preview prior to the announcement that we'll make in April to the industry. Okay, so nobody else knows about this other than the Dacxi Chain community. I'm going to move or switch gears now onto blockchain. So I've just got a couple of slides to share on this, and then I'll go to a couple of the questions that have been shared with us. So I think everyone understands that the plan has always been to create our very own Dacxi Blockchain in support of the whole Dacxi Chain vision. So if we think of this in terms of the end game, global equity crowdfunding, it's an open network of platforms where an approved company can raise capital globally from investors anywhere in the world. And so that network needs to be automated. That's all about the technology. It needs to be frictionless, and it needs to be universally trusted. Okay. And so this has always been a very, very powerful use case for a decentralized blockchain purpose-built to achieve this outcome. So the Dacxi blockchain. It also needs to be highly secure, very low cost, and extremely flexible. Okay. So if we combine those attributes with the scale and scope of a global equity crowdfunding ecosystem, really what it points to is that it makes a lot of sense that we build our own blockchain. And we've obviously talked about that for a while now, the Dacxi blockchain. Many of you will also know that a little while ago, I said to you, look, we're not focusing all of our resources on the blockchain development right now. We're focusing on the application layer. We're focusing on the APIs that allow different platforms to connect with each other. That work is continuing, so that's unchanged. What we've decided to do is to go back and actually get the blockchain development project moving again, okay? And the reason for that is that the amount that we've learned over the last handful of months, collaborating closely with the industry, we're now confident we know enough to go and build version 1 of the Dacxi blockchain. Okay, so that's a really, really significant milestone for us. We're looking at everything that we now understand that the blockchain needs to support and achieve. And we're saying we know enough. We know enough to go back and build version 1. So I want to talk a little bit about the Dacxi blockchain use cases. So in the end game, where we have this global ecosystem of platforms using our infrastructure, we see Dacxi blockchain having up to 7 use cases. Okay, so I'll quickly run through these, and there'll be opportunities to expand on these in subsequent sessions. The first is really what we might call the primary use case, which is this idea of the international transfer of investments between an investor's currency and the currency that's utilized by the company that's raising the money, okay, issuing equity. So this international transfer across currencies, this is sort of the global base currency use case for Dacxi blockchain, and of course, absolutely the use case for Dacxi coin. The second use case on Dacxi blockchain is share tokenization. So we all know this is coming. It's taking the world probably a little bit longer than we expected to get there, but that move is inexorable. It's inevitable. And so we understand that our blockchain has a share tokenization use case, which is really powerful, where we can issue smart contracts representing shares that are being held, not just ordinary shares, they might be different classes of shares. All of that can be incorporated into a smart contract. Okay. Another use case for our blockchain is investor ID. So the know your customer provisions that have to be met under any regulated market, financially regulated market anywhere in the world, all of those KYC and anti-money laundering provisions, they can all be captured and managed through blockchain, okay? It's private and yet it's shareable. So all of the constructs exist to manage those two states. And it also manages elegantly for things like change of ownership. So if you've got a tokenized share in a company and that changes ownership, all of that can be managed through the Dacxi blockchain. In the future, not just the transfer of the token itself, but the ID of the two parties that are exchanging that token. Shareholder registry. This is something that we've thought a lot about. Every company must have a legally compliant register of their shareholders, and so as tokenized shares are changing hands, that register needs to be updated. Okay. And that's a real problem when we get into tokenization, but blockchain through investor ID and some other components can actually solve that problem very, very elegantly. So shareholder registry is another really strong use case. Custody of assets, this idea of independent and highly secure custody of assets that are held on the blockchain or any form of tokenized assets. That's another really strong use case for our blockchain. Secondary markets, we've talked about this previously, where a market can be constructed to allow these tokenized shares that have been issued through equity crowdfunding, allows these tokenized shares to be traded in a structured and compliant fashion. And then as a global cryptocurrency blockchain use case, allowing for international transactions, payment of blockchain fees, and things like staking on blockchain nodes. So with our own blockchain, all of that becomes absolutely possible. So there's a number of use cases for the blockchain. I think the design has to anticipate an end game where we've got some real scale, right? So thousands of deals being shared, thousands of transactions where people are investing every day. And so when we look at some of those scalability requirements, we're building what's called a layer 2 solution. Okay, so Dacxi Chain will be a layer 2 solution, which just simply means that it sits on top of a layer 1 blockchain like Ethereum. And that manages some of that grunt work, which is typically, a scalability challenge. And then our blockchain, our layer 2 blockchain, sits on top of that, and it's fine-tuned to manage transactions much more scalably, much more quickly and efficiently. Okay, so that's a very common approach when scalability is an important focus. So look, I'm going to talk a little bit more about this in the future. The main thing is that you understand that blockchain development has recommenced. We've got a really good understanding of what it is we need to create version 1, but we have a really exciting future for that blockchain technology across all of these different use cases. The technology, this is just a visual representation of what I've talked about. So we've got an application layer, which is where partners are logging in and doing things to communicate with each other. An API framework where we automate some of the deal sharing components so that the interface doesn't have to be used for everything. And then we've got the 2 layers of blockchain that underpin all of that. So this is the way that we visually represent the Dacxi Chain stack, particularly internally when we do a lot of our technical design work. So in summary, look, the Dacxi blockchain has always been and always will be a fundamental part of the entire Dacxi Chain solution. We've identified up to 7 compelling use cases. Having our own blockchain gives us really significant credibility as well, particularly in the blockchain world, which means it will strongly support things like a tier 1 listing of Dacxi coin. It'll allow us to realize fair value for the coin in terms of the price. So it has, some very real benefits in that regard. We don't need to design the blockchain for every single use case to begin with. So our version 1 really needs to support this laser focus that we now have on getting equity crowdfunding deals shared in a territory like Europe and then immediately outside of Europe. So version 1 is a much more narrow focus, which means that we can make progress more rapidly. So as I've said before, we have commenced the build of the Dacxi blockchain. And just keeping in mind that the scale of that end game is really significant. And this is something that we've looked at and thought about a lot. We could have, if we're managing IDs on the blockchain, we could have as many as 100 million investors around the world, tens of thousands of tokens, hundreds of nodes, hundreds of thousands of transaction volumes potentially per day when we get to the end game. So all of that needs to be baked into how we're thinking about the evolution of that blockchain. Okay, so look, I've covered all of the key points that I wanted to cover. There's a lot in there. I've talked about the announcement that's coming up. I've talked about giving you a special preview on a component of that industry announcement that I think you would find interesting, which is why I've shared it. And this Global Equity Crowdfunding Alliance, we're hugely excited about this. We think it's got a lot of leverage in it for us and also for the industry. And I talked about blockchain as well and some of the progress and our thinking in relation to that. We've got a bunch of questions. I've tried to distill it down to a few because I don't want sort of to be sitting here forever. Everyone's got better things to do with their morning or their evening. But there are a couple that I just wanted to call out. So there's a question here about, is Dacxi Chain concerned about competitors? Look, this is a very, very good question. I did cover this a little bit in the presentation. So as we sit here today, we have unambiguous leadership advantage. We have all the intellectual capital, we have the technology, we have the team, we have the engagement with the industry, and we have all of that momentum, okay? But I also just want to point out in response to this question, we take nothing for granted, okay? It's very, very important. So we don't assume that no one is ever going to be interested in doing this in the future. So what it means is we have to get the full leverage out of this first mover advantage. And that is absolutely what we're focused on doing. So today we do not have a direct competitor. Could that change in the future? Absolutely. Which is why all of the momentum and the progress we're making now is really, really good for us. It's good for the industry, because we're moving things forward and we're taking ownership of that whole global agenda. So hopefully that answers that question. The next question was, when will Dacxi Chain make its global industry announcement? Well, I think I've answered that today. Originally, we wanted to do it just before the end of the quarter. We've said, no, we need a little bit more time because there's now some extra components to this. So we're going to do that in April. And April's a hard commitment, so it's not going to move again. A little bit more time, I think, will give us a much higher quality outcome. And look, there was a few other questions that came through that reminded me that it's worth just covering off a point with everybody very quickly in conclusion. And that is that I think hopefully these people are in the minority, but I think there's still some people in our community that it's not clear that we are not ourselves an equity crowdfunding platform. So I just wanted to make that really clear for everybody. So we are a technology company. We are collaborating with the industry to give them access to purpose-built technology. So we're the technology provider, which is essentially the infrastructure and a set of tools that sit on the top of that infrastructure that allow them to collaborate directly with each other to formulate this global ecosystem. So we are the tech provider. We're going to hand over infrastructure. We're going to hand over tools. That will never stop. We'll keep adding to that infrastructure. We'll keep adding to those tools. We're not actually an equity crowdfunding platform ourselves. And that's important, because if we are, it means we're competing with the companies that we're asking to engage with us. And clearly, as a technology provider, there's no conflict of interest for us or for anyone else in the industry to engage with us. Okay. So it's just a couple of little questions that made me think that clearing that up was worthwhile. You'll be pleased to know that that's it from me. We've covered a few different things. Please keep those questions coming in. It also helps us understand what are the themes that we can explore in these updates. There's always, some of the obvious questions, and keep those coming as well. Because really what I want to do is try and enrich everyone's understanding of the journey that we're on with Dacxi Chain, the progress that we're making. Like today, I want to share with you, things that are coming up that no one else knows about. So we want to keep doing all of those things. So I'm really hoping that people are finding it helpful, and it's enriching people's understanding of some of the things that are going on day in, day out that you may not otherwise know about. And thank you, as always, everybody, for your continued interest and support. And thank you for joining tonight. In which case, I think, Indy, we're done.